We would like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which we and all of you meet. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging.
Welcome to the podcast, Sex, Love and Science with Lauren and Lauren, two sex and relationship experts.
We will address all of the big issues in sex, love, and relationships.
We recognize that humanity is diverse. All bodies, orientations, and sexualities are welcome.
I'm Lauren Bradley.
And I'm Lauren Muratori.
And welcome to Sex, Love, and Science. Today we are talking about one of the most common issues to come into our couples therapy sessions.
Yeah, infidelity, which apparently 30 to 70%, some statistics say 44% of people will engage in infidelity. Some other statistics might kind of compromise and say 50%, but it is very prevalent.
It's really common, Lauren, isn't it? I think it's really hard for people to sustain fidelity in long-term relationships these days. We see infidelity really frequently between our clients in couples and in polyamorous relationships too. Breaking contracts in a relationship is, really, really easy to do these days.
Yes, exactly. And for the purposes of today's episode, when we're talking about infidelity, what we're really talking about is deception. And deception could look in a few different ways. We're looking at cyber, we're looking at physical, and we're also looking at emotional. So infidelity does not just have to be a sexual scenario.
I love that, Lauren. I think that's so true. You know, what we're looking for are breaks in your relationship contract, whatever that contract is. You could break that in so many ways, having feelings for someone that you're not supposed to have feelings for, or going and paying for sex work when you're not supposed to have sex outside of that relationship, or having lots of OnlyFans accounts when your partner said, please don't use digital contact. It just depends on what the contract is that you set up with your partner, and you should really know what that is, by the way.
Well, that's the point, because you know what? For a lot of people who do come into the office and, want to talk about infidelity, most of the cases, they've never actually created a contract. They've never spoken about what infidelity looks like. So it's kind of a really eye-opening thing to even consider is, well, what is fidelity and what is infidelity and what is our relationship contract, right? So, hey, word to the wise, maybe go home and talk about this with your partner tonight.
Yeah, 100%. And if you're entering a new relationship, get really clear with them at the start of it. What are the rules for this relationship? What are you signing up for? What can you or can't you do? I think this is really important if you are looking at needing any kind of sexual or emotional connection outside of it, that you get permissions first, at least, or some kind of discussion with your partner about how you can get that satisfied within that relationship structure.
Exactly. If you're honest from the very start, then the relationship probably will have a great chance at sustaining, and then also being able to talk about these things as you go. Because the other thing to point out is relationship structures can change and the goalposts can change. And if you have good communication skills, you can do this, as time progresses on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that negotiation at the start of the relationship is so important. And I guess another thing, Lauren, which is really interesting, I don't know if you see this with your work, but I hear a lot of clients saying, only cis men, heteronormative men cheat. Only men cheat. It's a lie. People of all genders can cheat. It's not exclusive to cis het men.
Exactly. And, a lot of the research does show that women prefer emotional cheating.
Yeah.
Because they're not getting their emotional needs met at home.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? I came across some stats that did say that 60% of men and 45% of women are willing to admit that they have had an affair in a past relationship, and 70% of all marriages experience an affair. 70%, that's mind-blowing.
That is mind-blowing, and that's just people who are surveyed and are admitting to it.
Yeah, and that's really heteronormative stats, by the way, people, and very monogamous stats, by the way, people. So my guess would be that the stats are actually even higher if we took a full spectrum of all relationships out there.
That's a really good point. So why do people cheat? Why is infidelity's been around since the dawn of time. Why do people do this is probably the biggest question that I get asked. What about you?
Yeah, it's such a common question. How can I avoid being cheated on? Why did my partner cheat? Why did you do this? It's usually the first thing people want to know. And we've got some insight into that.
Yeah, and you know what? Sometimes the why doesn't come easily for the person who did do the deceiving.
Yeah, definitely.
And sometimes the why really isn't that straightforward.
Yeah, it's complex. And usually it isn't just a one-off opportunity that happened that someone just flicked a switch and they decided to break the contract. Usually there's a really long lead up to these situations. There's a long-term breakdown in the relationship structure, breakdown in needs being met that creates this tension between couples and leads to this, I guess, exposure or this porous relationship, which is really susceptible to breaking.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
When we're looking at infidelity, we see this really commonly in clients, and it's a range of spectrum, from having a full-blown long-term affair to having a short-term fling to, cheating online, having private accounts online that you use to access or pay for OnlyFans accounts or sexual content to simply, really overly investing in a friend emotionally, connecting, outsourcing emotional support to someone in a way that's just a little bit beyond what you'd say would be a standard friendship.
And I think there's a good point to make that there's no right or wrong way to do a relationship, you know, so you really have to figure out what feels right for you. I've got people who come in and think that their partner who watches porn is, cheating. I've got people who think paid sex is not cheating. And we're not here to say what is right or wrong, but do some soul searching and figuring out what feels right for you and bring that inquiry to your relationship.
Yeah, I love that, Lauren. It's a balance of knowing, what's okay in your relationship, but also what I think is a really good point is that you don't own your partner's sexuality.
Correct.
Just because you're in a relationship with them doesn't mean that you own the entirety of who they are as a sexual being. So you don't have control, say, for example, over when they might masturbate, right? Because that's a private act that they might do for themselves. But some people think and assume that if I'm in a relationship with someone, I have control over when they indulge sexually in any behaviors. And that's just simply not true. We're a sexual being in our own entity for ourselves. And it's up to the relationship discussion to negotiate what the rules are around that. But it's also okay to have some private parts to your sexuality that are just for you, like masturbation or like your kinks and fetishes if you don't want to share them with your partner, as long as, again, you're not breaking any kind of external contract you've got available.
Yeah. And what I just say is you can't play thought police. You can't shame your partner's fantasies or what's in their mind. We're all allowed to have beautiful, erotic, sexy thoughts, and that's ours. If we want to share them with others, that's a choice that we can make. But if somebody's willing to do that with you, to shame them for their thoughts is pretty disheartening.
Yeah, you want your partner to come to you and try and find a source for their sexuality and their outlets within the relationship. They're coming to you first because they're looking to you as a possible option for creating some of this. And that's where sex therapy can come in really handy, because we can look at what you consent to and what you don't consent to and really support you to negotiate bringing some of that part of your sexuality into the confines of a relationship.
Yeah, good point. I mean, if 1 out of 3 people coming into couples therapy is, coping or, trying to work out infidelity, this is big, guys.
Yeah. But hey, don't freak out just yet. Don't look at your partner and go, oh my goodness, are they with the milkman or woman or person? Let's look at why. Why do people cheat? From what I've seen, and also, if you look at any of the beautiful work from Mr. Perel around this, cheating comes from an unmet need within the relationship and a lack of communication about that need.
Exactly. And I think a really good myth to point out that I'm not sure about you, but a lot of people think that because their partner won't engage in a particular sexual act, for example, or a fetish or, a sex position, that is the one reason why people cheat, which I just kind of want to dispel right here and now, because I see that very, very rarely.
Yeah, me too. I never see that. People don't cheat because they didn't get a blowjob or something. It's actually far deeper than that.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even when they are physical affairs, physical breaches of that trust, there is an emotional element to why that is happening. I think, yes, you can say a typical myth might be, oh, men are just horny all the time and they need
Lies.
sex.
Lies.
And, therefore they need to go out and get it.
Lies.
Well, why are they doing it? Is it just purely to need sex? Well, some of these people might have to look at themselves and what are they actually needing out of the sex? What is the sex giving them?
Yeah, absolutely. Look at yourself. Look at why, what your motivations are. Sex isn't a need, it's a want. We don't die if we don't have sex, right? It's not something that's compulsory for us. So it's a need. It's an unmet need that we go looking for, or an emotional connection we go looking for that we don't feel comfortable or safe to communicate with about our partners. Maybe there's a disconnect in the relationship where you're able to share or be there for each other. And that creates this divide in communication. So you're more likely to seek something externally. It's far more common for it to be about the quality of the relationship that you're in than it is for it to be about your partner being an asshole, really.
Yeah. And, at the end of the day, I like some of the work of Barry McCarthy, and I think he talks a lot about secrecy and how erotic the secrecy is to fueling a extramarital affair.
Yeah, that's right. But usually it comes from some other internal driver, and keeping things secret, keeping things taboo. We all know the desire and drive that we have for something which is taboo that we can't have, right?
Yeah, well, and that just makes things even hotter, doesn't it?
It can, absolutely. At least initially before it all comes down, crumbling around you, right?
I want to include that really helps the eroticism here. It's novelty and that secrecy. And it just makes it even hotter for people, which I'm not saying is good or bad or anything. I'm not putting I'm not putting an opinion on this, but it just fuels that erotic fuel to go out and do these things.
Yeah, and if you're looking for some erotic desire or some kind of novelty, then of course maybe that's an opportunity to discuss within your relationship how you can create that feeling for yourself too.
Exactly. And, it's really hard for people to do that. If it was easy, maybe there'd be a less percentage of people who engaged in infidelity. But, communication is really, really important. Can't stress that enough.
Yeah. If you're not talking to your partner and if you don't know how they're feeling about your relationship, then that's a warning sign. That's a danger signal. You don't know their level of satisfaction and you don't know what you need to work on to make them feel more loved. They don't know what they need to work on to make you feel loved and connected either. Then of course you're going to go amiss and not connect on your needs.
Yeah. So, Lauren, shall we talk about the process of recovery? Because, it is it's a long path.
It's a very long path. I think that's a really challenging thing with infidelity. And it's heartbreaking, when we see clients come in this space, it's really hard and we empathize so much with them, the pain that they're feeling. And the difficult part we have to say to them sometimes is, hey, you're in for the long game on this one. Trust unfortunately takes time and repetition and consistency to heal.
Absolutely. And time. And, I like likening it to just the sandcastles of trust is every time you breach the trust again, everything gets washed away.
That's right.
So every little thing that you do over time helps rebuild. And it only takes a small little wave to wash that trust away. So it's very important to be very mindful of every little micro thing you do to rebuild trust.
Yeah, trust is a long game. You're right. It's built, it's scaffolded, it's developed. And it's not something that we can necessarily take for granted or we should blindly give, but we do need to acknowledge where our partner is trustworthy. And often in these occasions, people take a really narrow lens to this and say, okay, my partner cheated on me. They were unfaithful. They betrayed me. They lied to me. But, they're actually still a really trustworthy person in a lot of ways.
Yes. Well, I mean, the definition of trust is just really hard to even start. If we looked at trust in a relationship, if somebody had sex with another person, but they still pick up the kids every day, they still make sure there's groceries, they go to work, they make sure that they're there for the external family. There's lots of different ways to look at trust.
Yeah, you need to take a bit of a broad lens to this and not focus so narrowly on that one breach. I know that's really easy to say and hard to do because you're really hurting, and maybe you're listening to this and your partner has cheated on you and you're feeling really heartbroken, and our hearts go out to you too. But really try and see them for the person they are and try and separate their behavior choice from the person they are. And that's not to say their behavior choice really sucked and that they should change it, but maybe them as a person is a different thing, and you can see their values and attributes more broadly and maybe connect in with them on that level instead.
Yeah, I think, bingo, separating the person from the behavior, right? Because often in these cases, what happens is there's a lot of arguing and a lot of conflict, which, is quite reasonable. You can understand why that would happen. But when we start using really, I guess, derogatory language, if we're starting to really kind of abuse our partner and assassinate their character over time, it's not going to help rebuild the trust, because trust goes both ways.
Yeah, that's 100%, Lauren. I think one of the greatest difficulties for a person who's been betrayed is to know that your role is also to be proactive in repairing the relationship. It takes one person to break it, but it takes two or however many people in your relationship to fix it. And that really sucks for the betrayed person.
It does. It feels really unfair. It feels unjust.
Yeah.
And, as a practitioner, I really find it very important to hold the space for the person who was deceived, because to minimize those emotions or kind of sometimes do the therapy work without really acknowledging the feelings doesn't help the process along. And it's tough. It's tough.
It's really tough. It's really tough. And it's also hard, working with that person, the betrayed partner, to support them to unfortunately accept that if you want a relationship that's fair and equal, then we can't have you be the good one and they be the bad one. Yeah. And we can't continue to punish this person and make them atone and fix forever in the relationship, because that's not a fair and equal relationship. So, at some point there needs to be a balance there, and there needs to be both people working to repair. We can't just expect the person that's done the cheating to come and do all the fixing. It just doesn't really work like that. That's not how you repair.
Exactly. And, I just want to highlight that forgiveness is an inside job.
Oh, yeah.
And that goes actually for both parties. So the person who was deceived and who did the deceiving, because it's hard to forgive what has happened. And it's, if someone has been the unfaithful one, I think the road to forgiving yourself is quite a challenging task.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of PTSD usually in these cases.
Yeah, definitely. I see a lot of clients that have flashbacks, that have intruding thoughts about the episodes of what's happened. And for the person that's done the cheating or betrayal, there is a lot of shame that's held by that person. And certainly being able to work through some of that shame, either in individual therapy or if you're comfortable with your partner in couples, can be really helpful for you to let go of that behavior and separate it from who you are as a person, But there's a difference there, right? In your intention to repair and your intention that it doesn't fit with your values either.
So what I hear you say, Lauren, is that people with remorse really kind of help improve the relationship, get back together.
Yeah, 100%. And, when we look at some of these stages of recovery for infidelity, the first one is establishing safety. And to do that, you need to take a bit of responsibility and stop the affairs, stop what's going wrong, and commit to not engaging in any kind of infidelity or betrayal outside of the relationship to repair it. I do sometimes see clients that come in that still want to have their cake and eat it too, and they're kind of still seeing the person they cheated with just as a friend or just as a coworker. That doesn't create safety for your partner. There needs to be a recommitment back to the relationship to really create that safety and containment for your relationship so that it can repair in a healthy way.
Absolutely. I 100% agree. If the affair isn't over, and there's no likelihood for the relationship to turn into more of an open or polyamorous style, right? And one person's wanting that monogamous relationship, it's really hard to build that safety. It's pretty unfair to come to couples therapy and then expect to kind of massage this out, because it's kind of, it's an impasse.
Yeah. And I guess when we look at poly as well, most of the great poly relationships that I know and that I've seen clinically and with my friends and people around me is they've not started from a place of wanting needs outside the relationship, but they've started from a great place in the relationship, a strong foundation, and then wanting, okay, maybe I can get some more additional parts of myself met elsewhere. And it's done through compromise and negotiation. It's never done from a place of cheating and now I need this other person.
Correct. And that's with the knowledge and the understanding or belief, really, that all of your needs can't get met by one person.
Yeah.
Not everybody believes that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's hard.
It is hard. It's very hard. And I think that's another conversation.
Yeah.
That's a long episode.
Right. One person for the rest of your life is really, really hard, monogamous people, right? It's really hard. So let's just take that one in our mind while we're doing this episode. It's a big ask. It's a big ask.
Exactly. And you just reminded me of an Essa Perel video that I remember seeing on Instagram several years ago, talking about forgiveness and, repairing infidelity. And from what I recall, I remember her saying that you can never guarantee that another person will never hurt you.
Ooh.
Yeah. It's I guess what she was saying is, any relationship is a leap of faith.
Yeah.
And there's no guarantee whether you are engaging in monogamy and poly. If your partner has cheated on you, has never cheated on you, you cannot, hand on heart say that they're never ever going to hurt you.
I one up that, Esther Perel. I think that you can guarantee that your partner is going to hurt you at some point in your life. They're going to hurt you. They're going to do something that upsets you. They're going to say something that upsets you. They're going to stuff up because people are human beings. And I think one of the big challenges with infidelity I see is this idea that their partner is this perfect being and that they're this glorious, wonderful thing. And then they've done this horrible thing and they fall from this beautiful pedestal. And we sort of don't allow them to sometimes be human and make a mistake. And yeah, a really bad mistake that we don't want to do again, but also just knowing that they're a human being. They're going to stuff up, they're going to hurt us, and maybe this is the way they do it. But what matters is whether they acknowledge the hurt. The second step to recovery from infidelity is atonement. So whether they acknowledge it, they apologize, they take full responsibility, they own it.
Yeah. Well, taking accountability and somebody who wants to understand why will hopefully have the likelihood of not repeating.
Yeah, it's that insight. Why did I do this? Where did it come from? And that's the third step, telling the story. What happened? What led up to this infidelity? Really understanding, was it because, I was working really late at work and I didn't see my partner and they were alone by themselves all day and, I wasn't feeling really sexual and we just became really disconnected. We saw each other and we just, watched TV and went to bed and there was nothing there to connect, and they went and hung out with a colleague and got quite emotionally connected and there was an emotional affair. Understanding why it broke down.
That is super important because that helps you, I guess, reestablish relationship 2.0, as I like to call these cases.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes that can actually be better than the first round, right?
Well, that's the work we do.
Yeah. Do you know that you can actually be stronger after infidelity? What?
I know.
Controversial.
I know, but actually that's our aim. You're going to have a better relationship when you both do the work. Look, that's not a promise here. That's a goal. That's
Yeah. But, sometimes I say to my clients and, obviously with all compassion and empathy and understanding for how hard it is, sometimes infidelity can be the worst way to break the ice in all the bad parts of your relationship that you need to fix.
Absolutely. That's a great point. And you know what? There's a lot of people who recognize that. And, the magic in the therapy process, watching people, just have these breakdowns, have so much sadness, so much remorse, so much forgiveness, and rebuild and learn and thrive. I think that's one of the reasons why I like being a sex therapist.
Yeah, 100%. We can work really well when things are broken. That's a really great place to start to rebuild, right? And, sometimes this can be the way that you suddenly start to talk about how you're not you're unhappy in your sex life, or how you suddenly start to talk about, hey, I feel like we've lost our friendship. And usually we haven't talked about those things before. So the infidelity brings it to the front and allows you to actually have more open and honest discussions about that unmet need and then get it met within the relationship.
Yeah. And just also acknowledging it's not always just about the lack of sex or the vanilla sex or whatever you think might be going wrong within your relationship.
Yeah, it's really complex. It can be unmet emotional needs. It can be a sense of mystery and excitement, as you say, or the taboo. It can also be someone just feeling really insecure and wanting someone to boost their confidence as well.
Exactly. So it's really nothing about the other partner. It's really about the individual.
Yeah, I think a lot of betrayed people come in and that's so sad, Lauren. They sit and say, why me? What did I do wrong? How did I stuff this up? And, sometimes in those cases, there's a relationship component, and maybe between the couple, they could have worked on communication, for example. But sometimes it is, your partner has some huge insecurities and they've gone to seek satisfaction for those insecurities by getting attention from other people. And that's nothing you've done wrong at all.
Exactly. And that is a very hard pill to swallow. I think a lot of us have been there.
Yeah. I mean, it's so common, right?
It certainly is.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, when we look at this kind of case, that's where you want to look at yourself and go, okay, if there were no challenges in the relationship, and I guess maybe there wasn't a communication issue because you weren't talking about it, but if you were trying really hard, you're trying to communicate to your partner, you're trying to be there for them emotionally, you're really open to talk about your sexuality, but your partner's still gone and done something like this and they do have big insecurity issues and they don't understand their reasons why and they haven't worked on it, that's the point when you might want to question, is this the person for you? They're not remorseful. They don't know why.
Correct. And that's when there's a high chance you won't build relationship 2.0 and it might not thrive. It's on this topic, I think it's interesting to point out, there's that saying that everybody says, once a cheater, always a cheater. And look, that's a really hard, it's a controversial thing to say. But, statistically, which is really interesting, is that somebody who's been unfaithful in a relationship is 3 times more likely to be unfaithful in their next relationship. And that was actually in the Archives of Sexual Behavior in 2017. So kind of not that long ago.
Yeah. So, I mean, it is a common repeat behavior and we tend to repeat our behaviors, unless we intervene, right? Behaviors can become really static, but I think that's the big piece. And I guess you need to know why you've done it, what's gone wrong. When I see my friends or when I myself have been looking for partners before, or when I speak to my clients, one of my biggest pieces of advice is the person or persons you're looking to date, do they know themselves? Do they know their issues? And have they worked on them?
Yes. Do they have that introspection?
Yeah.
It's pretty important just to have a sense of self and to be able to be secure within a relationship.
Yeah, because if you can identify what's wrong and you have the focus to actually work on that for yourself, that makes a great partner. That gives you the opportunity to have relationship 2.0. That helps you to overcome becoming a cheater and help you to actually be a reliable communicative partner in your next relationship.
Yeah. And you know what? I think, Lauren, you just gave me an idea for another episode because I think we should really talk about what because there's a lot of people dating out there.
Yeah.
Yep. What to be looking for in people. And I think that would be interesting, just a side note.
Oh, I love that, Lauren. I love that. And you've got me thinking too about how, people who always get cheated on feeling like they're always going to get cheated on from their next partners too.
Yeah.
So this is a hard one. So maybe you're attracted to a certain kind of person that's not giving you your needs, or maybe they're not communicating, or they're secretive, or they're withholding, or they've got avoidant attachment personalities, which we'll talk about, right?
Yep.
But maybe it's not actually about you as well. It's not like you carry this label of cheat on me with yourself.
Correct.
And so stop blaming yourself and start looking at the relationship dynamics and start looking at maybe the people that you're dating as well, potentially.
Yeah. And, on top of that, I just want to add, sometimes it is just loving yourself. And really just love and just filling yourself up with so much love where you don't need that from somebody else, right? And then you might actually start finding people who resonate with you. But I think we're getting off topic here. we're say we could talk about infidelity for a long time.
Oh, we really could. We really could. So I guess, after you've done your establishing safety, you've done your atonement, apologizing, telling the story about what went wrong. Next step is forgiveness. Oh, this is a hard one, Lauren. Forgiveness.
Again, yeah. We kind of spoke a lot about how that forgiveness is an inside job for both people.
Yeah.
To forgive the person who cheated, to forgive themselves, to forgive yourself for actually re-entering the relationship, or even entering the relationship to begin with sometimes is a process for people. There's a lot of forgiving.
Yeah. And I think one thing that really helps for a lot of people, again, is that divide of, I'm forgiving the person because they themselves have values that are different to this behavior choice, and I'm forgiving them as a person, and I'm acknowledging the hurt this has caused them and myself, but I'm not forgiving the behavior. And cheating is still not okay, but I forgive you for choosing that behavior. So really trying to separate out, forgiveness doesn't mean that you have to feel great about it. And that's a big one. A lot of people want to feel like, I feel like it doesn't bother me anymore. I'm really cool with it. You might always be really angry.
Yeah, exactly. It's not accepting bad behavior.
Yeah.
And you don't have to. We're not saying that's going to fix a relationship. It will probably do the opposite.
Yeah. But it is about knowing that your partner, if they've done the atonement and they've established safety and they've told you the story and they understand themselves, that they are working to repair.
Yes.
And that they themselves as a person, at some point, if you're ready to give them some kind of pardon for what they've done, or to acknowledge that they are a good person with bad behavior choice occasionally, or bad behavior choice in a very specific context that won't come up again.
Yeah.
And that could be really helpful to help rebuild trust and to allow your partner also to want to be a bit more open to you as well.
Exactly. And, at the end of the day, we're forgiving people for ourselves, right? Because the less resentment and anger we hold on to, the more we thrive as humans.
Yeah, I wish I had the research on hand for that, but definitely holding that resentment and anger can have a huge effect on you physiologically as well.
Oh, yes. So just something to kind of take away from there.
Yeah. And so when we look at infidelity, the last step that we have is reestablishing intimacy and trust.
Oh, yeah. And look, some people will actually jump to that and jump to it pretty quickly. And it's not a straightforward process, let's just say.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that really helps clients to think about, particularly if it's been sexual or physical infidelity, is to really think about, why you have sex.
Yep.
And the reason why someone has sex in an infidelity setting or in a betrayal setting is usually totally different to why they have sex with you. And a lot of people say, but the sex is the same and they've done this with someone else. It's very different kind of sex.
Oh, totally. Like, PIV is the common denominator, but we're comparing apples and oranges here.
Yeah, it's a bit like going out for a degustation meal at your favorite restaurant versus having a Macca's thing in your car, right? It's still a meal, but they're very different meals, right? And very different intentions around it.
Yes. Yep. I like that one. I'll go with that.
Yeah. I mean, you could be having the Macca's in your relationship. It didn't have to mean that the gourmet is the, relationship setting and neither's good or bad, but they're just different meanings and different intentions. So don't think that your partner having sex with someone else is exactly the same as them having sex with you. Their reasons and their experiences might be totally different, and it may be a very different act for them, and they may still be able to have sex with you in a way that connects with you in the way that you love still.
Yeah. And part of the process, I don't know about you, Lauren, is when people want to hear very specific what happened in the physical affair. And what I then see is specific sex acts then traumatize the person.
Yes.
So then when they engage in these sexual positions or acts or they feel like that it doesn't bring pleasure. So that's a very slippery slope.
Yeah, look, a large part of some of the recovery for this process is being able to ask the questions and having the answers and getting that trust back about consistency in answers. But also, you may never ever know the answer fully, and they may never ever completely understand the answer fully. And I think when it comes to looking at different kinds of sexual pleasure, I think the most important question is why they have the sex, not what sex they're having.
Exactly. Because, sometimes disclosure is a very interesting part of the therapeutic process because, you want to make sense of it all, as we've been saying, and we want to establish that safety. But if we're asking our partner to disclose every nitty-gritty detail about a really hot sexual encounter, we have to question, what is that information for? Is it helpful or is it a hindrance? And the answers might be the same for everybody.
Yeah. And I think you need to think about, will this help me? Will this help me recover? Will this help me feel more trusting in my partner? And, it might not help you to actually understand what went wrong by knowing specifically what sex acts they did, but it will help you to know, what was going on in your partner's mental state at the time. So maybe if you're willing to, maybe let go of some of those finer details sexually and really focus on repairing what makes you feel loved and connected to your partner. Again, using Lauren's favorite buzzword, connection, right? What makes you feel connected to your partner again, and try and do those things and use that as a form of connecting in sexually again.
Yeah. Well, what a fascinating topic, Lauren. I mean, we probably could have sat here for hours and spoke. Hopefully this is starting to kind of, demystify some of the common thoughts and just normalize that this is something a lot of people go through.
Yeah. If you've been betrayed or you are currently betraying your partner, just know that if you do decide to discuss it and work on it, that you can actually be stronger for it. So if you are in that position, just know that there is help and support out there for you, whether you do couples therapy, sex therapy, or go to couples therapists or sex therapists or relationship therapists individually. Know that you can actually recover from this, and you can have a loving relationship either in this relationship, or if you've left your partner, you can love again and free from the fear of cheating.
Yes. Oh, that's so wonderful. And I think that's just the beautiful spot to end on. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening.